Awesome. We can go ahead and advance to the next slide. So in order to set the stage to talk about paint bucket reuse, I'll first go over our story at Greensheen. I'll let you know who we are and how we operate. Then I'll discuss the container problem that we have at Greensheen. That will lead into a discussion about our most recent RREO grant project that created a solution to our container problem. Once I I'll get you up to speed on containers, I'll talk about what's coming next for Greensheen and our reuse operation. So a little bit about Greensheen and our story. We were founded in 2010 in Inglewood before paint stewardship laws or paint care existed in the state. Our founder and CEO, Kevin Callahan, was a former painting contractor, and he saw just how much paint was wasted, and he decided to do something about it, which is how he created Greensheen. We are a latex paint recycler, and we are also a manufacturer of 100% recycled content latex paint. We now operate 3 facilities, one here in Denver, another in Kent, Washington, and our most recent facility opening in Rotterdam, New York. We created the first closed loop system for recycling here in Colorado. I know a lot of Recycle Colorado members are familiar with the circular system for glass. That incredible operation is often referred to as the first closed loop system in the state. However, Greensheen created the first system when we began collecting unused and leftover latex paint in 2010 and recycled it back into new latex paint to be sold as a product. So we are a collector, a processor, a recycler, and a manufacturer. So we really have involvement in every single step of the circular process used to turn old paint into new paint. We use a proprietary process that turns unused latex paint into 100% recycled content paint. We then sell our latex paint product at a fraction of the cost of brand new virgin paint. We've also conducted double-blind independent analyses on our paint in which we compare Greensheen products to name brand store-bought virgin paint. Greensheen always tests at the same quality, or at least at the same quality, if not higher quality than virgin store-bought paint. Company-wide, we have an approximately 92% paint-to-paint recycling rate that we're really proud of. This means that of all the paint we collect, 92% of that is turned back into recycled content paint. Another metric we're proud of is we have an overall 86% recovery, recycling, or reuse rate. So that means 86% of absolutely everything that we take in at our facility is either recovered, recycled, or reused. As part of our services, we offer a free door-to-door paint pickup in 6 counties along the Denver metro area. We also pick up paint from various retail collection sites and some household hazardous waste facilities. And we also pick up paint from large volume pickups. We also host a series of paint recycling events that are held all over the state each year. Adding to our success story, as I previously mentioned in the introductions, earlier this month, we received silver recognition from CDPHE's Green Business Network. We really pride ourselves on our sustainability efforts at Greensheen, and we are continuously looking for ways to be more environmentally friendly. As I'm sure most of you know, Greensheen now operates under the State Paint Stewardship Program, currently overseen by Paint Care. We were collecting and recycling paint before this law came into place, but as of 2015, we are covered under the program. The Colorado Paint Stewardship Program funds the end-of-life management of paint, but not the packaging that the paint comes in. So when I say packaging, I'm specifically speaking of plastic and metal containers. We see lots of 5-gallon HDPE plastic buckets, 1-gallon polypropylene plastic cans, and 1-gallon or smaller metal cans. As we recycle paint, we found that we were left with a huge container problem that was actually more expensive and problematic to manage than recycling paint alone. We've been recycling the metal cans for pretty much our whole existence as a company, as metal recycling is readily available. However, traditional recyclers won't accept plastic containers, so the 1 gallon or less polypropylene cans and the 5 gallon HDPE buckets were all being sent to a landfill. We were forced to send high valuable plastic to landfills, which really didn't sit well with us. We searched high and low for plastic processors that would take this material, but no one would accept it because of the small amount of dried residual paint found within the containers. Not only is sending this high value plastic material to the landfill expensive, we also just didn't want to do that at Greensheen. So through a unique partnership with Waste Not Recycling in Northern Colorado, we were able to start sending them 5 gallon paint buckets. Waste Not then shreds those buckets and we sell the plastic regrind back to our bucket manufacturer. Through this process, we did close the loop on recycling 5 gallon HDPE buckets. However, we were finding that this process was very resource intensive and is still pretty costly, as we have to pay for plastic shredding, transportation of the regrind, and then transportation of the remolded buckets that we purchased back from the manufacturer. While this unique partnership with Waste Not Recycling provides an excellent solution to our problem, and while we will continue this relationship and use it as one of our outlets for bucket recovery, we began to think that we could simply wash and reuse buckets instead of sending them through the energy-intensive recycling process. This thought led to applying for RREO grant funding to essentially create a bucket reuse operation. The whole project started when my boss, Kevin, drew the schematic shown on the slide on our conference room whiteboard. This schematic then came to life through the grant application. When he first started drawing this out, I really had no idea what he was talking about or how we were going to create this. But once we figured out generally what equipment we needed to build such an operation, we hired a CAD designer to create 3D blueprints, which you'll see on the next slide. And nothing like this has been created before. So we didn't have any examples to turn to, but we believed in the reuse potential for buckets. In our grant application, we indicated that at that time, we received roughly 712,600 pounds of buckets per year. That's approximately 356 tons of buckets at our Denver facility alone. Based on data collected over the past several years, this volume is increasing annually at an astonishing rate, approximately 10% per year. Also, paint manufacturers are phasing out the 1 gallon metal cans and are shifting to 1 gallon polypropylene cans, thus creating more plastic waste for us to manage. Additionally, more and more paint is being collected and processed each year, which also increases the amount of plastic containers we receive. Of all of these buckets, some are damaged and really do need to be sent through the full recycling process. However, a lot of these buckets are in perfectly good condition and could certainly be reused. Our idea was to create a bucket wash line housed in a stationary trailer where we could wash and reuse buckets. And I'll pause for a moment to clarify. I keep mentioning buckets referring to 5 gallon HDPE buckets, which is the focus of this grant project. As I previously mentioned, metal containers are already being readily recycled, and 1 gallon polypropylene plastic cans are more difficult to reuse or recycle. These cans, while high value plastic, have a metal rim pressed to the top of the can. So therefore, before reusing or recycling, the metal rim needs to be removed along with the handle, then the plastic can be recycled. While we do have the equipment to take the rim off 1 gallon cans and the shredder to recycle them, the focus of this grant was again on the buckets because of how easy it is to reuse them. Next slide. As I mentioned on the last slide, once we had the whiteboard schematic of the wash line, we hired a mechanical engineer and CAD designer to create the model that you see on the slide. This model ended up being extremely accurate and essentially looks like exactly the physical trailer we have now. There are two areas of the trailer. The first is the equipment area that obviously houses all of the equipment. And the second is the wash bay where buckets are actually washed. The coolest thing to me about this trailer is that it features a fully self-sustaining water reclamation and filtration system. So when you are washing buckets in the wash bay, all the water flows down to the ground into aluminum catch basins. Those catch basins then funnel the water into a series of filtration equipment that filters the water to potable standards. The water is then pumped into a freshwater storage tank where it can be reused again and again to wash more buckets. Therefore, this whole system is self-contained and absolutely no wastewater is produced. We do from time to time have to add fresh water to the system due to water loss from evaporation, but that is minimal. The wash line equipment is truly incredible as it is all automated. All you have to do is turn on the system and a series of float valves will automatically time the rest of the process. If you look into the wash bay, you can see teal cylinders along the wall. Those are 5-gallon buckets that are mounted to the trailer wall. We use those permanent buckets to mount dirty buckets too, so the inside and outside can be washed. 5-gallon buckets nest nicely into one another. Because of that, we can nest buckets, wash the inside, then flip the bucket over and wash the outside. I have more pictures on the next slide. So on this slide, you'll see two photos of the actual inside of the trailer. The picture on the left is standing outside of the trailer looking in. While the trailer is on wheels and could be moved, the trailer will be stationary at our facility and is permanently accessible through one of our loading docks. Working through the equipment, you see in the picture on the left, we have the pressure washer, which is used to wash the buckets. Then we have the pumping and filtration equipment. It's a 3-stage filter that we use, which then flows into the vertical freshwater storage tank. Continuing on into the trailer through the clear plastic and orange glass curtain, you will see the wash bay. In the picture on the right, you see the wash bay, and here are the permanently attached white 5-gallon buckets. Some buckets are open, facing outwards, and others are closed, facing the wall. When we are washing the inside of the buckets nest onto the outward-facing buckets. Then when we want to wash the outside of the buckets, they are flipped and nested onto one of the closed buckets. You will also notice the aluminum graded flooring in which dried paint debris and water flows through into the catch basins, which are below that graded flooring. You will also see some fans at the end of the trailer. What's not pictured here is on the opposite side of the bucket wall, the right wall of the trailer. There is now a door that has been cut in with some pallet racking installed along the outside of the trailer, which is where buckets will be placed to dry after they are washed. This trailer was completely customized by our metal fabricator and built to perfectly satisfy our needs, which is pretty cool. Next slide. Continuing with more pictures, the two pictures on this page show the filtration equipment in more detail. The first picture on the left, we have the first stage of the filtration system. You should be able to see there is fabric filter paper. This is similar to landscaping fabric, and as the water is pumped from the wash basin, it then percolates through the fabric and into the black basin below. The fabric filter paper removes leftover dried paint and labels from the water, so the solids. The filter automatically senses when the fabric is full and will advance the roll of fabric, so fresh fabric is then being used. The used filter fabric is then collected in another basin below the filter. Once water flows through the fabric and into the black water basin below, an automatic float valve is used to trigger the pumping and filtration system to turn on. That is the blue box you can see on the left side of the picture. Once the pumping system is turned on, the water is pumped from that black basin underneath the first stage filter and moves through the second and third stages of filtration. In the picture on the right, you can see the second and third stages of the filter. The second stage of filtration is done by an ozone generating machine that removes odors and bacteria from the water. The ozone generating machine is found in the blue box. The third stage of filtration are the two cylindrical columns right next to each other behind the water maze sign. The third stage operates like a home water softener system. However, there's no salt involved, and the filtration membrane itself does not need to be removed or replaced within the filtration system. Once the water is filtered, it is then pumped into the vertical freshwater storage tank, which you can see also in the picture on the right. Water is then stored in this tank. When the pressure washer is turned on to wash new buckets, water is pulled from this freshwater tank and used. When the system needs to be cleaned, or in other words, when the filter membrane in the two cylindrical columns needs to be cleaned, the system will automatically draw water from the freshwater tank and pump it through the system in reverse, cleaning any residual debris. That water is then moved through the system again and transferred back into the freshwater storage tank. So again, the first filter or stage 1 removes solids. The second stage generates ozone to remove odors and bacteria. Then the third stage uses a membrane to fully filter and remove any remaining constituents. Next slide. So again, on this slide, you'll see the CAD design that I showed earlier. Hopefully this picture makes a little bit more sense now. The only difference in the model and the actual trailer is the order in which the equipment is placed in the trailer. Since the end of the grant period, or the end of June, we have been washing buckets to get an estimated throughput rate for the system. Based on how much dried paint is left over in the buckets, we estimate that we're able to process 540 to 720 buckets per day. This assumes that we will wash buckets for 6 hours a day. This yields to over 1,080 to 1,440 pounds of buckets per day, which then equates to 140 to 187 tons of buckets per year. We estimate that roughly 60% of the buckets that we receive at our facility will be able to be washed and recovered. The other 40% or so will be sent to waste not to go through the full recycling process I discussed earlier. The next steps and essentially what we will be doing with the buckets are to first wash and reuse buckets for our own means currently at Greensheen. Right now, we package our recycled paint in white buckets. However, not all of the buckets we will wash and reuse will be white. So we are considering packaging our product in gray buckets. So there's more availability to package our product in. However, these white or gray buckets need to be in excellent condition, free from scrapes, dents, or other aesthetic issues. For buckets we will not use to package our product in for one reason or another, we will wash and sell reused buckets at a fraction of the cost of new buckets. Right now, if you go on Amazon, a 5-gallon bucket and lid can be upwards of $10 per bucket. You can certainly get a bit of a discount when purchasing in bulk, but we will be able to sell perfectly good washed and reused buckets at a fraction of the cost. We will also begin offering bucket washing as a service. So there are many entities that use 5-gallon buckets, not only just in the painting sector, but in all other sectors of industry. So we will partner with them to wash their buckets so they can reuse those as well. We are currently in talks with a compost program in which, in this partnership, we would sell reused buckets for a restaurant compost program. Then once those buckets are emptied, but maybe still a little bit dirty from the compost, we will then wash those buckets in an exchange program. So this trailer really has applications well beyond just buckets for paint. We'll also begin reporting to the CDPHE numbers for reuse. We already have had 2 tours of our wash line trailer, and we will certainly offer more tours to any entities interested in coming to visit our facility. This project is already generating a lot of attention, and we're happy to tell the story of how it came to be. We would also like to build 2 more trailers, one for our facility in Washington and the other for our facility in New York, because we have the same bucket problem at those locations as well. I previously mentioned earlier, but we'll also set up 1-gallon can recycling. Because of those metal rims, the 1-gallon cans, we need, because of the metal rims, we need to use a de-ringer machine to essentially slice off the metal rims. Then we can send those cans through a plastic shredder and then sell that plastic regrind back to our can manufacturer and buy 1-gallon cans back from them. We currently own both pieces of equipment, the de-ringer and the shredder, and those pieces of equipment will be set up in the very near future. We essentially just need to get the electrical upgrade done and plug them in at our facility. Then we'll be also recycling the 1-gallon or less polypropylene cans. Then we will continue to recycle the buckets that are not suited for reuse, or if we don't have the capacity to put buckets through the reuse trailer, we can still recycle those. Next slide. That's all I had prepared. I'm happy to answer any questions. You also see my email address on the slide. Please feel free to reach out anytime. We'd love to partner with as many entities as possible to promote the reuse of buckets. So if you're at all interested, I would love to connect. I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes, Michelle.
That was great. Thank you so much, Emily. I really learned a lot. I want to come tour the trailer. And do you take the buckets from Boulder County Hazardous Materials Management Facility and clean them?
So the Boulder HHW facility is one of the sites that we service. And so any buckets that are collected there will directly come through our facility.
So if we have people call EcoCycle and they have empty buckets, both metal and plastic, can we direct them to you? Will you interface with consumers just dropping off empty buckets?
Yes, please. And someone from EcoCycle reached out to me about that. I didn't hear back from him, but yes, whatever entity or consumer has empty buckets, we'll certainly take them.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I had a question.
Yeah, go for it, Malik.
Thanks again, Emily. And now that I feel like I'm understanding it better, since I saw the tour last week, just for everybody else's context, so I got the chance to see it in person. I was curious, is the filter membrane and the filter fabric the same thing, or are those different?
Those are different. So the filter fabric is used in the first stage of the filtration. So the water first flows through the aluminum graded floor, and then it is pumped through that filter fabric. That fabric filters out the dried leftover paint, labels, any other solids that, chunks of paint that might be in those buckets. The water then, after it goes through that first stage of filtration, goes through the ozone generating stage. That kills the bacteria and the odor in the water. And then the water is pumped through those 2 cylindrical columns. In those cylindrical columns, there's another filter membrane. It's like a very fine mesh, almost like you were on the tour, you saw the abrasive filters that we use in our process to filter the paint before it's packaged. It's a membrane similar to those, so a metal membrane that then filters out any other constituents that might have passed through the filter fabric.
Does because I know you talked about the system being completely self-cleaning, is the filter fabric also that case? And if so, like, how does that clean itself?
So that's the one thing in the system that we will have to purchase and replace. So we buy huge rolls of the filter fabric, very much like landscaping fabric. And one section of that fabric can be used a lot of times. In all of our testing so far, it hasn't even advanced yet. So that's the one thing that we will have to dispose of and then replace, is that roll of filter fabric. But everything else is self-cleaning and can be washed and reused.
Thank you.
And another thing to mention along with that, so right now, all of the dried paint that's filtered out from that filter fabric is just being dried and sent to a landfill. However, there are companies like Robinson Brick that have found that dried leftover paint is a great admixture for some of their products. So creating bricks, landscaping, pavers, any non-structural block, essentially. And the polymer nature of latex paint can actually replace some of the virgin, I guess, ingredients that they use to make bricks and blocks and whatnot. So once we are washing at full capacity and accumulating and generating more latex paint, we're going to be separating that out and then going into a partnership with some of those landscaping paver manufacturers to then sell that residual dried leftover paint to them. By weight, it's not a huge volume of material, but it's still just one more thing that we'll be able to divert.
Very cool.
Thank you, Melly. Thank you, Emily. Fantastic presentation. I saw, Kevin, you came back on camera. Does that mean that you also had a question? No.
No. I just want to come back on camera after.
So that she's not staring at a bunch of black boxes, that she's got some faces to look at. So Emily, I was curious, how much water is lost per cycle in, I'm sure there is some loss of water. It's not 100% return. What does that look like?
The actual amount, it's hard to say. In that large vertical freshwater storage tank, it holds 200 gallons. And we have been using the system and testing it since end of June. And that storage tank is still 75 to 80% full. So there isn't a whole lot of water that is lost to evaporation. We might start losing a little bit more now in the summer heat. I did mention we have some doors cut open in the side of the trailer. So when the doors are open, it's hot outside, we're using a hot water pressure washer. We might be losing more to evaporation in the summer months than in the winter. But it's pretty incredible just how much water stays in the system and can be filtered and reused. So I wish I had a better, more accurate number for you, but as of right now, we haven't had to add any water to the system, and we've been using it and testing it for about a month and a half now.
Fantastic. And I see Michelle's got another question.
Yeah, Emily, has the formulation of paints changed, and do you get alerted to when some of those manufacturers change something? So does it affect your process at all?
As long as it's still considered water soluble latex paint, it won't really change our operation much. So oil-based paint typically doesn't come in 5-gallon buckets, but we certainly wouldn't wash any oil-based material in this wash basin just to keep the water to be able to filter to potable standards. So, we couldn't wash any container that had residual hazardous waste or, oil-based products in the wash line. But just as long as painting manufacturers are creating a water-soluble latex product, then that won't really change our process as far as washing and reusing the bucket. It's a good question.
And I hope you saw the compliment from Karen, Emily. She had to jump to another meeting, but she said that she found this fantastic and applauds the work that you're doing with your team at Greensheen. I have another question about, do you have an idea of what other industries might take advantage of this bucket washing and reuse system? Have you already established some relationships with folks on that score?
So the first step after the grant project, so the grant was due, everything had to be done on June 30th, and we were really coming down to the wire. We had some delays in finding the trailer and fabricating it and whatnot. So we have our first task once the trailer was up and running on June 30th was to calculate that throughput rate. So then we could formulate pricing and timing for actually how many buckets we could accept to be washed. So now that we have that estimated throughput rate, the next step is now what I'm working on is marketing this as a service to other industries. So, any painting contractor, painting company within the painting world would certainly be applicable. This new composting project is really cool to think about because that would certainly be an easy application where 5-gallon buckets could be used and washed and reused. So many landscaping companies I know use 5-gallon buckets, and we could certainly handle dirt or mud or rocks, whatever in the system. So those are my target audiences right now, but anyone has ideas on other companies or industries that use buckets, I would be happy to hear those ideas. But right now we're just kind of starting to, start slow and then build up. This composting project would essentially be our first customer. So we're really eager to get that project up and running and see, exactly how that works. But I think, painting industries and contractors, compost would be great, and then landscapers at this time are who we're targeting.
Those are all industries that I could see using and reusing buckets. I know that the restaurant industry generates a lot of these 5-gallon polypropylene buckets, but they're not really in a position to reuse them because they're primarily used to contain food products, and the washing, as great as it might be, I'm sure it does not come, it's not food grade clean when it's done. But is there any desire on your part to partner with them to get a supply of used buckets to wash and repurpose for other things?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, so we're doing, kind of washing and reusing buckets for our own means, washing and selling buckets to whoever needs a 5-gallon bucket that doesn't want to pay brand new prices, or washing and reusing buckets for one given entity and kind of that exchange program. So if restaurants were generating buckets that they didn't want to send to a landfill or don't have a recycling option for, we would be happy to take those buckets.
Sorry, I'm making notes, and so I looked away and realized I wasn't managing. If somebody else had a question, I don't want to monopolize. Does anybody else have any comments or questions?
I have a question. This is Mirkala. Do companies like Home Depot, Lowe's, do they sell recycled buckets? Is that a market that, because I just think of my husband and the 10 buckets we have around our house that are all probably brand new virgin plastic, although we reuse them for years, but obviously we'd buy the recycled ones if possible. Do they have those? Is that a market? I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question. So right now the big box stores sell brand new buckets. and but they do not sell any reused buckets. I'm sure if they were even open to selling reused buckets, they would need a massive quantity. So it would probably take us a little bit of time to be able to wash and generate those quantities that like a Home Depot or Lowe's would need to, you know, put an item on the shelf to sell. But, you know, that would be awesome if we could get into big box stores selling reused buckets. But right now, as far as I know, they're just selling, you know, the brand new 5-gallon buckets.
Thank you. And I saw, Michelle, your comment, you know, but it's a hard sell to say, I need a quick bucket and to drive to Resource than it is to drive to, you know, 5 minutes to the store. That's, you know, or less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, Brandy, jump in.
Oh, I just wanted to provide a comment because I really hadn't thought about this before as being an option. But as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, one of my things I'm celebrating is we're doing a big litter cleanup this weekend. And we also acquired grant money to build litter cleanup kits for the second time in, the last 3 or 4 years. And those litter cleanup kits involve like a Homer bucket or whatever. That's what we ended up getting, is Homer buckets from Home Depot, and a little, you know, a little picker and stuff like that. But how cool would it have been if our little scrappy neighborhood organization could have bought used buckets and not, you know, bought them at Home Depot? It didn't even cross my mind, to be honest, but just a comment, even more things that we could do with them. So.
Yeah, well, that's a good thought, Brandy. And if you ever do any of those projects again, reach out. I'm sure Greensheen would be happy to even donate some buckets for such a good cause like that.
Yes, I definitely will. And I kind of am slapping myself for not even thinking about it. Silly.
Well, you thought about it in time and you said it to the right person. Melik.
Just bouncing off Brandy, that's a really cool idea. Also, presumably, that's something that Parks and Rec, like thinking about Denver specific, who I think now oversees like volunteer cleanups. You know, maybe that's another market there for those used buckets as well. Would be Denver Parks and Rec, and presumably the other city municipalities that have cleanup programs.
A great idea. Thank you, Melik.
That is a good point, Melik, because I live really close to Ruby Hill Park, and every single morning there's people out there, Parks and Rec workers, carrying around buckets. So that would, yeah, and there's a lot of parks.
Oh, yeah. That is such a good point. I mean, I don't want to tell tales out of school, but at a previous organization I worked at, I had 5-gallon buckets in stock to give to people to collect compostables. And my Parks and Streets department were constantly raiding my stash because they were so handy, you know, for their purposes. And gosh, it would have been wonderful to offer them, hey, instead of taking that, would take this instead, please. And so I certainly have had experience using those buckets for compost, and this is I think that's going to work out really well. Any other questions before we ask Allie to stop the recording? Well, before she stops, let me get on the record of saying once again, thank you, Emily. Thank you, Greensheen. I really appreciate you going out of your way to take time to share this. The recording will be posted on our website. So by all means, direct people that you have conversations with about this that are interested to follow up if they didn't get a chance to be here. Thank you so much. And Allie, you can stop the recording and we'll finish up with a couple of announcements.